Nicolas Cage is the Spider in Spider-Man Noir on Amazon Prime, a spin-off right out of the Spider-Verse movies. I just watched all 8 episodes in black and white, so let's talk about Spider-Man Noir. I just think it's such a cool idea to take the character that we met in the Spider-Verse movies and to put Nicolas Cage in his own show, live action, playing the same character. It's also really unique and fresh about this show is the fact that it takes place in the 1930s during the Great Depression, and you have kind of that old-timey vibe with the fedora hats and the full suits and overcoats, and the way they talk's kind of got that old streetwise mid-Atlantic accent, I would say. And it just creates a whole different aesthetic to the superhero genre, which is just a breath of fresh air after watching so many different shows on Disney Plus and so many different movies where we kind of see the same thing rehash over and over. But to put us in a different time era and in doing a timepiece with all the aesthetics and the jargon and the tone of that era just makes it so much more fun and refreshing. They give you a choice to watch it in black and white or color. I chose to watch it all in black and white. I didn't watch any of it in color because I wanted to fully immerse myself in the experience that they present to you. Plus, I grew up watching shows like I Love Lucy, which is also in black and white, so it's not too foreign to me. But I really just wanted to lean into what they're trying to do with this genre. So you've got Nicolas Cage coming back as a character. He plays Ben Riley, the Spider, the only hero in this universe. And it takes place in kind of a detective thriller type setting. So you follow him in his career as a struggling private investigator. He's got a small business, but he's also dealing with the aftermath of his time as the Spider. He's pretty much retired at the beginning of this, and he finds his way back to become the Spider again. But you see kind of his life at that point in time. So it's not exactly an origin story, although we get nice flashbacks to kind of fill in those blanks as far as what happened in the past. Most importantly, you get flashbacks about what happened with his wife. And I think part of that experience and trauma kind of shapes his personality and who he becomes later on after the fact. And you see that manifest in different ways. Although he's doing his Nicolas Cage kind of quirkiness and zaniness, which we all love, it's so entertaining to see Nicolas Cage kind of do his thing yet again. But it's kind of masking this darkness that he's hiding underneath. And he kind of deals with his pain and his grief through sarcasm and wit and just kind of making fun of people. He's generally very obnoxious and kind of annoying, but his little quips and jokes, and I think it's how he deals with a lot of his trauma and a lot of his pain and a lot of what he's going through. He's a very lonely person, and the way he sees the world is quite different as a result. Generally speaking, I found the show to be quite charming and quite exciting as far as the concept and what they were trying to do, and I thought they executed what they're set out to do generally pretty well. So they are going for a very specific genre, a very specific timepiece, and a very specific tone. And I think they nailed it for the most part. My biggest criticism, I guess, is the fact that in some of the episodes, it kind of slows down to a sluggish pace. So I did feel kind of bored a lot, and I find myself kind of not paying attention as much as I should have. And I think that's a result of kind of bad pacing at some points. Although the writing, the dialogue was generally very sharp, was very clever and very witty and very intelligent at times. So I appreciated the lines, and I also appreciated the actors delivering the lines. But there's just some points where the plot just kind of slowed down or got a little boring or got a little confusing because there's kind of a lot of undertones going on at the same time. So it could be a little distracting and hard to keep up with as far as what's going on. To be honest, I don't think there's a whole lot of Spider-Man costumed fighting type action as you would expect in a superhero franchise to see a lot of that kind of stuff. And even though it takes place in a different time era, they could have easily made it a very action-packed show. By way of example, you have Sin City, which is also kind of the same genre, also black and white with some red tones. But that was full of very stunning visuals and action. Here, you didn't get a whole lot of that, but when he did put on the mask and start acting as the Spider and jumping in and fighting people, it was quite satisfying because the style of fighting was appropriate for its time, but it's still pretty entertaining and still pretty action packed when they wanted to be. Also, what carries the show is the supporting actors. So you had a lot of great supporting actors in all the other roles that surround Nicolas Cage and Ben Riley. Lee Jun Lee as Kat Hardy is kind of a showstopper. When she gets on screen, she's pretty mesmerizing and she has a pretty strong presence. And her character is pretty interesting as well, as far as her motivations, her loyalties, and how she's dealing with people and situations to kind of get what she wants. So I really enjoyed her portrayal of the character. I thought she was probably one of the strongest actresses in the show. But there's plenty of other charming characters as well. Karen Rodriguez plays Janet, Ben Riley's assistant. She is very likable. She kind of keeps him in check and is not afraid to speak her mind. She grows on you quite a bit throughout the show, and she's kind of his Jiminy Cricket, his voice of reason at times. Obviously, you're gonna have some villains in this kind of show, and what you get are variations of different characters that you're familiar with in the original Spider-Man. So, for example, you get a version of Tombstone, you get a version of Sandman, and you get a version of Electro. But they're played differently because they're different characters in a different universe in a different time era. It's kind of fun to see a different interpretation of those powers being used in a different context because he's fighting these guys with these same powers that we've seen over and over in all the different renditions of Spider-Man, but not quite like this in a 1930s backdrop. So this version of Sandman is actually kind of sympathetic. He's not completely crazy. He's actually, in his mind, kind of doing the right things. He doesn't like to hurt people, but he will to get the job done. And then in contrast, you have their version of Electro, who has, kind of the electricity powers, and he's like the complete opposite. He's completely out of his mind. He's kind of a Shakespearean actor wannabe, so he's very over the top, which is actually probably one of the more fun aspects of the show to see this version of Electro just kind of ham it up. Brendan Gleeson plays Silvermane, who's like the big boss, like the mob boss of this show, and he is fantastic. You recognize him. He's got the Irish accent, pretty distinctive actor, but he does such a good job of being a very scary and believable and intimidating mob boss that can really do some harm. And you never know, he's kind of unhinged, so you kind of never know who he's going to kill next or why. He brings such a strong presence to the screen in his weird, oddly charming, kind of conniving way. And what makes Ben Riley a little bit different from the other Spider-Man we've seen is that he's a reluctant hero. He's morally gray. He does things that are kind of tricky. He's a bit of a shyster. And that really makes for an interesting watch because he's kind of sloppy. He's kind of messy. He's rude. He's not always courteous to people. So it's kind of fun to see this version of a character in the context of being Spider-Man in this universe. And at the heart of it, this is a detective thriller type show. So it has those same beats and those same plot lines and that kind of storylining as far as piecing together what a detective would do in a detective show. But if I'm being honest, I wanted to like this show more than I actually did. Again, I got a little bored at times because it does slump at some parts. But when the action kicked in and when the characters were being themselves and being kind of snarky, it was a lot of fun. But I just wish they did a better job pacing and keeping the beats up. So I would have to say overall, I'm going to give it a 70%. It wasn't bad. It was a very fresh concept to see, and I was glad that I watched it. But I just wish it was a little bit more entertaining throughout each episode. And there's just some moments that were weaker, some moments that just felt like they were dragging their feet a little bit. But overall, I thought they executed pretty well. It ended on a nice note. I was satisfied with how the whole thing wrapped up. And I don't think we need a second season of it. I think this one season was sufficient to tell his story so that we can appreciate the character more when we see him perhaps in the next Spider-Verse movie or in other projects. So given how weird and how different this Spider-Man is, I'm very curious to hear what y'all thought. If you watched it already, did you enjoy this kind of Spider-Noir 1930s version of Spider-Man? Did you enjoy Nick Cage doing his Nick Cage shenanigans? Or was this not your flavor of superhero? Some people prefer something more traditional with more action and higher stakes and more color. But let me know in the comments what you think. Would you like another season of Spider-Noir? Well, let me know what you expect to see in a second season if they do one. What additional characters would we like to see? Where do we want to see Ben Riley in his journey at that point? Until next time, this is PK's Reviews.